Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a stack of documents here today that are going to force us all to rethink someone we think we know really well.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, when you talk about Martin Luther King Jr., the image is always so specific. It's the Lincoln Memorial, right? I have a dream. It's monumental. It's polished.
It's the icon version, for sure. But the source material we're working with today, this is just not that. We're looking at a document called A New Sense of Direction.
And it's so different.
Oh, completely. You have to kind of wipe that I have a dream image out of your head to really get this.
Right, because this wasn't a speech that was broadcast to the nation or anything. This was internal.
Totally internal. This was a private, strategic assessment. He gave it to his own staff, the SCLC, during a retreat in 1968. I mean, just imagine the room for a second.
Okay.
It's the late 60s. The air is probably thick with cigarette smoke. Everyone's exhausted. Tempers are short. This is not a victory lap. It's a crisis meeting.
That sets such a different tone. Reading through this, King sounds heavy. He actually admits this is the third time he's tried to answer the question, where do we go from here? In a setting like this. Yeah. It feels like he's really wrestling with the fact that the old playbook just isn't working anymore.
It wasn't. And that is the core mission of this deep dive. We need to understand why the playbook broke. King is functioning here as a sociologist and a general all at once. Right. He's analyzing why the movement is fracturing. He's dissecting the riots, tearing apart American cities, and he's trying to sell his team on a brand new and frankly terrifying strategy.
And he doesn't pull any punches. He starts by drawing this really hard line between the past and the present. He calls it the first phase versus the second phase.
And this is so critical. He looks back at that first phase, the mid-50s to the mid-60s, and he essentially says, look, that was the clear-cut battle.
That was the South.
That was the South. The goal was dignity. It was about the right to eat a burger at a lunch counter or, sit wherever you want on a bus.
And narratively, it worked because the villain was so obvious.
It was theatrically perfect. And King points this out. You had peaceful, well-dressed Black people marching. And on the other side,
you had Bull Connor with fire hoses and attack dogs.
Exactly. It was a moral binary. If the authorities let them march, the myth of segregation just collapsed. If the authorities beat them, well, the whole world saw them as monsters. It was a no-lose situation for the movement.
King calls those the days of luminous victories, but then the movement goes north, and suddenly things get a lot murkier.
This is where he drops a really hard truth on his staff. He says they hit a wall because there was a divergence in what people actually wanted. The Black community wanted total, unqualified freedom.
But they're white allies.
King says most of them were only interested in improvement.
That distinction is just massive. Improvement sounds like charity. Freedom is structural.
Precisely. As long as the fight was about basic human decency in the South, everyone was on board. But the second the movement pivoted to the North, and specifically to economic equality, jobs, housing, sharing the wealth.
That era of goodwill just vanished.
It evaporated.
He uses this analogy of a ladder that really stuck with me.
It's a brutal image, isn't it?
Yeah.
He says the Black man was allowed to climb a few rungs up the ladder towards the light. But the moment he reached for the top rungs, the ones that represent real economic power,
he realized the person holding the ladder didn't want him going any higher.
So the resistance wasn't just some regional Southern thing.
No. And that was the heartbreaking realization for King, that racism wasn't just a Southern sickness. It was deeply rooted in the entire American structure.
When they tried to fix slums in Chicago or unemployment in New York, the white resistance hardened instantly. He calls it a cold, systematic withdrawal.
And that withdrawal created a vacuum. And what fills that vacuum? The riots.
The riots are the elephant in the room in this whole text. I mean, you have to remember, cities were burning. Newark, Detroit, Watts. King is fighting a war on two fronts here.
Right, because on one side, you have the establishment saying, see, they're lawless criminals, we need more police.
But then on the other side, you have this growing faction inside the Black movement saying, no, this is a revolution. This is guerrilla warfare.
And King steps right into the middle of that and says, you're both wrong.
He does. He pulls out a quote from Victor Hugo from Les Miserables that just completely flips the script.
The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness.
It's such a sophisticated argument. He's saying the riots aren't the primary crime. They're derivative crimes. They're the inevitable result of the greater crimes committed by white society.
The slums, the poverty, the broken promises.
Exactly. He's basically indicting the policymakers as the real arsonists.
But he doesn't just leave it at society is to blame. He actually breaks down the anatomy of a riot. He lists 5 specific triggers. It reads like a medical diagnosis of a sick country.
It really does.
Let's go through these because they feel so modern. The first one he lists is the white backlash,
which is just the shattering of hope. It's that feeling that the country promised you change and then slammed the door in your face.
Then he lists discrimination. But the way he describes it is so exhausting. He says it hounds a man day and night.
It's not just one event, it's the constant closing of doors. But the third one, unemployment. This is where the numbers just stop me cold.
Yeah, I circled this part 3 times.
King does this historical comparison. He reminds everyone that during the Great Depression, the U.S. had about 25% unemployment.
And that was enough to almost cause a revolution. We had soup lines, total social collapse.
And then he drops the stat for Black youth in 1968.
30 to 40%.
30 to 40%, in the middle of an economic boom.
That's the kicker, isn't it? The rest of the country is buying color TVs and new cars, living in the affluent society.
And in the major cities, nearly half of the young Black men have absolutely no economic future. King is asking, how can you not expect an explosion?
It puts the rage into perspective. It's not just lawlessness, it's desperation. And then number 4, Vietnam.
You cannot talk about 1968 without talking about Vietnam. But King points out the double measure of injustice here. First, you're dragging these poor, unemployed Black men to go fight.
But it was deeper than that. He talks about the hypocrisy.
The hypocrisy. He says you have a government running rampant abroad, bombing villages, destroying families, solving its problems with napalm.
And then that same government turns to the Black community and says, be nonviolent, be patient.
King says the bombs in Vietnam explode at home. They destroy the moral authority of the government. They kill the dream that the country is actually good.
And the 5th cause, urban decay, just the physical misery of the slums.
Pollution, rats, overcrowding. He points out that millions were forced off the land in the South by agricultural changes, pushed into these northern cities that had no plan for them. It was a pressure cooker designed to blow.
But even in the middle of all this, analyzing the riots, King points out something really nuanced about the violence itself.
This is a fascinating observation. He admits there were billions of dollars in property damage, billions. But he notes the physical injury to white people was inconsequential.
Which just goes completely against the narrative that these were bloodthirsty mobs.
Completely. King argues that the rage was directed at property, at the symbols of the system, not at human beings. He refuses to accept that these young people are just brutes. He sees restraint even inside the chaos.
So he's diagnosed the illness. He understands the rage. And now he turns to the people who are going to inherit this mess, the youth.
Yes.
And I was surprised by this part. He basically does like a market segmentation of the entire younger generation.
He does. He realizes the movement is not a monolith anymore. He sees 3 distinct groups of kids that he has to reach.
Okay, so first he talks about the adapters.
These are the majority. The kids who are trying to fit in, They accept the system, go to school, try to get jobs. But, and this is key, King says they are profoundly troubled.
So they're not revolutionaries yet.
Not yet, but their consciences are waking up. They see the war, they see the racism, and they're uneasy.
Okay, then you have the radicals.
A small group, but a loud one. These are the ones reading Frantz Fanon, they're quoting Che Guevara. They don't just want improvement. They want to tear the whole structure down.
King uses this phrase to describe them that I thought was just brilliant. He says they're suffering from a mix of material abundance and spiritual poverty.
It's such a diagnosis of the modern condition, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have all the stuff, the TVs, the cars, but your soul is empty because you're living in this unjust system. And King sees that these radicals are desperate for something real.
They want direct self-transforming action.
Right. And that brings us to the third group, the hippies.
The hippies. Now, you would expect King of Baptist minister in a suit and tie to just dismiss them as, drug-using dropouts.
Right. Get a haircut and get a job. But he doesn't.
No, he takes them seriously.
He does. He critiques them for sure. He says they're seeking flight rather than fighting for change. And he points out the contradiction of using drugs to isolate yourself while you're preaching love, because love requires connection.
But he admits they're onto something important.
He says their dream of peace, their sense of beauty and gentleness is something the movement actually needs. He doesn't want to throw them away. He wants to synthesize them.
That's his grand plan, right?
Yeah.
He wants to take the peace of the hippies, the fire of the radicals, and the grounding of the adapters.
And merge them into a new force.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he needs that force because he's about to propose a strategy that is incredibly risky.
He knows riots don't work.
He calls them reactionary and says they just invite the government to use its superior military force to crush you. But he also knows that just marching and singing hymns isn't going to cut it anymore.
Not in the North. So he introduces mass civil disobedience.
This is the evolution. He says nonviolence has to mature. It can't just be a procession of pious elderly ladies. It has to be militant.
So what does that look like practically? Is it just stopping traffic?
Bigger, way bigger. Imagine thousands of people blocking highways, government buildings, airports, not secretly, but openly. The logic is that you fill the jails.
You just overwhelm the system.
You fill them until the system literally cannot process any more arrests. You force the machinery of the state to just grind to a halt.
It's using the system's own weight against it.
And the key is you force society to make a choice. Either you fix the injustice or you become a police state that has to violently suppress thousands of its own citizens on live television. You make the cost of the status quo too high.
But this requires incredible discipline. And King tells a story here that, honestly, it felt like a scene from a movie. It answers that question. Can you really get angry, marginalized young men to stay nonviolent?
The Chicago story. This is pivotal. So you have to go back to 1966. King is leading a march into a white, segregated neighborhood in Chicago.
And this isn't the South. The crowds are vicious. He describes screaming mobs, bricks flying, bottles shattering. It's a riot waiting to happen.
And who is guarding King? Who is standing between the marchers and that mob? Not the police. It was the leaders of the Blackstone Rangers, a notorious street gang.
Actual gang leaders. Men who, on any other day, would be solving problems with fists or guns.
Exactly. But King writes that as the bricks were raining down, these young men exercised iron discipline. They didn't swing back. They didn't break rank. They shielded the marchers with their own bodies.
How do you get a gang leader to do that?
King says it's because for the first time in their lives, they were given a constructive purpose. They weren't just thugs. They were protectors of a movement. It proves his entire thesis.
That even the most hardened individuals can embrace nonviolence if you give them a mission that matters.
It's a powerful idea. But as the document goes on, the tone shifts again. It moves from this high-level strategy to something deeply personal, almost philosophical.
He starts grappling with identity.
He's addressing that who am I question. You have to remember, Black power is on the rise, and there's this push to reject everything American, wear African clothes, separate entirely.
And King pushes back on that.
He does. He accepts the pride of Black power. He agrees that Black people need to reclaim their heritage, but he rejects the isolation. He proposes the term Afro-American.
Which was a pretty radical idea at the time.
It's a hybrid. Mm-hmm. He's saying, we are the descendants of Africa, yes, but we were also American. We built this house. He argues you can't peel the two apart without destroying yourself. He warns against what he calls Black suicide.
Which he defines as the bitterness that leads to hating white people.
Right. And he tells that story about the young athletes boycotting the Olympics.
Yeah, they raised some questions about the boycott, and they were threatened, physically threatened by their own people.
And King uses that to show that hate has no boundary lines.
Yeah.
If you start by hating white people, you eventually end up hating anyone who disagrees with you, even your own brother.
Hate is too great a burden to bear.
That's his conclusion.
Yeah.
And that leads him to what I think is the emotional peak of the entire text. It's this moment where he stops being a strategist and becomes, almost a mystic.
The wedding vow.
It literally reads like a vow. He says, I, Martin Luther King, take the nonviolence to be my wedded wife, for better or for worse.
It sent a chill down my spine when I read that. He's not saying nonviolence is a tool anymore. He's saying it's who he is.
It's a permanent commitment. And he explains this mindset with a theological concept that he calls the though faith.
The though faith. This comes from the Bible story of the fiery furnace, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Exactly. The king tells them, bow down to my statue or I'll throw you in the fire. And they say, our God is able to deliver us. That's the if faith. If God saves us, great.
But then they add that twist.
They say, but if not, we still will not bow. That is the though faith. It references the book of Job. Though he slay me, yet I will trust him.
That is just terrifyingly high stakes. King is basically saying to his staff, we're going to do this nonviolent revolution. We might win. But even if we don't, even if it gets us killed, We are doing it because it is right.
Not because it works, but because it's right. And you have to remember, he was killed just months after this. He was living that. He was living in the faux faith. He knew the cost.
It completely changes how you see him. He wasn't naive. He wasn't just dreaming. He was staring into the furnace and walking in anyway.
Exactly.
So how does he leave them? He's given them all this bad news about the riots, this really difficult new strategy, this heavy philosophy. How does he end the retreat?
With a pilot analogy. He tells them about flying a plane. When you fly east, you have the tailwinds. They push you. You get there faster. That's the good old days, the days of triumph.
But when you fly west, you have the headwinds. You have to fight for every inch.
And he says, don't worry, the engines can handle it.
Yeah.
He tells them they need engines of courage to battle those headwinds.
And his final challenge, he talks about creating a new man.
This is his final provocation for them. He says, modern civilization has mastered the grandeur of violence. We have missiles, we have submarines, we have mastered the material world. But he asks, can we invent something new?
Can we stop imitating the past? The Romans, the wars, the conquests.
Right. Can we achieve an evolutionary leap in human behavior? He calls for a new man, a nonviolent man, and he says we must be hammers shaping a new society rather than anvils molded by the old.
It's a call to be the architects of the future rather than just victims of the present.
It's a powerful place to leave it. It reminds you that King wasn't just fighting for civil rights laws, he was fighting for the soul of humanity.
And that is a side of Martin Luther King Jr. that you definitely do not get from a 30-second clip on the evening news. It's complex, it's messy, and it's incredibly brave.
Absolutely.
That is a lot to chew on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into a new sense of direction.
Thank you.
We'll see you on the next one.